In these difficult economic times, one thing is in abundance: the need for more services from the already beleaguered nonprofit sector.
For 4 straight years, nonprofits have, across the board, seen declines in revenues from all their major sources. They have seen a demand for their services go up.
We've lost a significant portion of our state resources, including a $20 million endowment that was swept in its entirety by the legislature.
Tonight on Arizona Week, how the state's nonprofits, including the arts, are doing post-recession.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support. Once again, your moderator, Michael Chiha.
Americans are known as a most generous people in good times and bad. Yet even that generosity has been challenged under current conditions nationally and here in Arizona. To gauge the effects, I spoke with leaders in the nonprofit sector. First, Patrick McWhorter, President and CEO of the Alliance of Arizona Nonprofits. How are Arizona's nonprofits doing post-recession?
Well, it's been a rough 4 years for the nonprofit community, and we've been tracking that through annual surveys that tell us how the revenues are doing for nonprofits, how their services are affected by declining revenues, and ultimately what it means for their organizations and their operations. And for 4 straight years, nonprofits have, across the board, seen declines in revenues from all their major sources. They have seen a demand for their services go up, and they have been largely meeting that demand. So you may ask, how do they do that? Well, they've been running deficits, tapping meager reserves, and their operations are quite strained after 4 years of recession.
Can you give us an example or two of specific nonprofits that may be really affected by this?
Well, the organizations that are most affected are those that have been relying upon public funds significantly. Many people don't know that nonprofits, while they raise dollars through contributions, and of course they oftentimes have earned income. You go to the museum and you pay a fee. That's what we call earned income. The second largest source of revenues for nonprofits is actually government grants and contracts. And in some areas, nonprofits in, say, human services and some education fields get anywhere from 60 to 80% of their funds from government sources. So with the state budget cuts, local budget cuts, and now increasingly federal funds declining, those organizations have taken the hardest hit in their finances.
Are you seeing fundamental changes in the way nonprofits are operating as a result of the funding reductions?
Well, in some ways, there were shifts happening before the recession, and they've been accentuated by these revenue changes. You saw a growing emphasis in the development of earned income and what we call social enterprise. These are essentially profit-making opportunities that go to the bottom line of the mission of a nonprofit, whether it's having a private business as like a subsidiary or just having a way of earning income off of your organization's activities in some way. And that was happening before the recession. Now organizations are looking to that as a major strategy to deal with these cuts in other sources. The other change that the recession has had has been in foundation and corporate giving, all of which have been down as well. Some of that has come back. Corporate giving, not so much. Foundations have started to, as their portfolios have improved with the stock market, they've been able to give a little bit more. But what they have done is shifted the emphasis of their funding, because so many of the government funding cuts have been in some basic needs and core human services areas. Many foundations have shifted their giving to those areas, essentially filling in at least part of the gap created by the government cuts. And that means they're not giving to the arts organizations or other civic organizations that they maybe gave to before. So those organizations are having to now change their strategies, being less reliant upon foundation and corporate dollars.
Are you seeing strategic consolidations of nonprofits that may have like missions and they decide to get together in some fashion, either a collaboration or an absolute merger? Is that going on?
We are seeing, we have consistently in the 4 years we've been doing our survey, about a quarter of organizations say they're looking at merger or very deep collaboration with other organizations. We haven't seen a quarter of organizations doing that. It takes time to negotiate these things. They can be very complex. One of the things about nonprofits and their finances that is especially different than the for-profit sector is that a lot of their dollars are very restricted.
We've talked about how tough it is for a lot of nonprofits and what a struggle it is in these economic times. But are there any out there that are having great success right now despite what's going on, or perhaps for some other reason?
Well, there are some cases. I will tell you that the goodwill of Central Arizona is one of the largest goodwills in the country. And during this recession, they have nearly doubled in size. If you think of goodwill, we know often about goodwill for the stores, but in fact, they do workforce development. That's the services that they provide. And so their stores are somewhat counter-cyclical in the recession, right? A lot more people are shopping there because they can't afford to shop at a regular department store. And yet the need for their service is greater. So it just seems like the recession is almost a boon for them. And in fact, that's what's happened. It's also a very well-run an effective organization. That is an outlier, of course. Who seems to be climbing back earliest are those organizations that had a very well-developed fundraising development program, usually with individuals, who have come back earliest out of all of our funding sources. And so they are coming back. And I've heard some organizations over the last couple of years say they're having their best fundraising year ever. And they are definitely, they took the hit, but they're coming back. But they really are the exception.
The governing philosophy in Arizona politics is one of self-sufficiency. How do charitable organizations and nonprofits fit into that philosophy?
Well, the interesting thing about the nonprofit sector, and this is nationally, in the early 80s when Ronald Reagan was president, he had a strong theme in his presidency called New Federalism. It was about pushing dollars and services out into communities. There was sort of a decentralization of a lot of the funding sources and programs at the federal level down to the states, local government. And then in some states, and Arizona is one of them, we then push that out into communities. So the growth of the nonprofit sector over the last 30 years has in many ways been tied to that governing philosophy, and especially here in Arizona. So we certainly embrace that. We believe that there are many services and much that nonprofits do that can best be provided by these organizations that are community-based organizations with rich ties to their communities. However, we can't do it without the partnership with government that was a part of the reason for our growth. And that's really the troubled partnership right now.
For a closer look at the situation, I'm joined by Kathy Wilson, a Senior Director for the United Way of Tucson and Southern Arizona. Welcome.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Are you seeing signs of recovery from the economic rough times among Southern Arizona nonprofits?
Well, there are some bright spots in the landscape, but there's the bright spots are on the funding side. We're starting to see some relief from the revenue decreases that we've been seeing over the last couple of years. However, the need is still great. We continue to see increases in requests for services from nonprofits.
So the human services side of nonprofits is part of our social safety net in our society. What kind of shape is that safety net in right now?
It's not in good shape yet. The safety net is funded by a variety of sources, both from government, from foundations, and from individual donations. And those sources of funding have been decreasing over the last several years. So we're along with the economic downturn we've all experienced, we're starting to see some leveling off, and we're playing a giant game of catch-up in order to be able to help the increasing numbers of people who have been affected by the economic downturn.
The United Way is one of the bigger nonprofits in the community, bringing in a lot of revenue and dispersing a lot of revenue for social service agencies and others. What kind of outreach are you doing to help the member agencies and perhaps any nonprofits to be more successful and to stabilize?
Well, there's an interesting new effort underway, a collaborative effort, and it's just getting underway as we speak. It's called the Tucson Nonprofit Loan Fund, and it's a collaborative effort of the Diamond Foundation, the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona, United Way, and others in the community. And the idea is to establish a loan fund where we can offer affordable market rate loans to nonprofits for operating expenses. So that should be up and running within the next few weeks.
And what kind of loans could nonprofits get from that in terms of dollar size?
Well, the details are still being worked out, but there are criteria that a nonprofit has to meet in terms of its own size, and the loans would be between $10,000 and $50,000 is what's being projected right now. So in addition to that new fund coming on board, not only United Way, but the Lodestar Center out of ASU and United Ways statewide offer workshops for nonprofits on how to streamline their operations, offer technical assistance in grant writing, and ways to increase their own fundraising efforts.
And how is the United Way itself doing with revenues and able to meet its obligations in the last few years?
Well, we're happy to report that with our new leadership over the last several years, we've really shored up our own financial position. We've gotten our financial house in order and streamlined our operations, reduced our expenses, and as a result of all those efforts, we recently earned a 4-star award from Charity Navigator, which is an organization that looks at financial situations of nonprofits, and that's the highest award that they offer.
Are you seeing any big changes in the way the United Way operates or the way other nonprofits operate in the community as a result of the economic difficulties we've experienced?
Well, one thing we've always done at United Way is to promote collaborations, collaborative efforts among our partner agencies. And now more and more, you see more of that taking hold and making some success in ways that it hadn't done in the past. So we have collaborative efforts around education, early childhood education, in the realm of income tax preparation. Many people are familiar with the VITA program, which is a large collaborative community effort. And in the world of elder services, with the help of the Community Foundation, we have a new collaborative effort called the Elder Initiative that brings together partner agencies to work together to share our resources, our knowledge, our expertise to make a larger community impact.
And beyond consolidation, beyond collaborations, there are consolidations going on. One of the more successful ones here in Tucson was the collection of literacy groups that came together. And you were telling me that there's another one about to come about.
That's right. The Our Family Services and New Beginnings for Women and Children are right now undergoing a merger. And those organizations both focus on homelessness services and homelessness prevention, and they just saw now as the time to bring their operations together to make a bigger impact in the community.
And that'll be completed within the next few weeks, you say?
I believe by the end of June that will be completed.
And we have just about a half a minute remaining. In that time, tell me a quick good news story going on in the nonprofit community.
Well, the good news story is that our nonprofits are learning very well how to do more with less. That Lutheran Social Services, for example, is one of our partners, and although they have needed to lay off some case managers because of funding issues, they've trained their case managers to be able to do applications for their clients to access services, needed services. So they're able to service their clients in a more holistic way, even though they are doing that with less resources.
Kathy Wilson of United Way of Tucson in Southern Arizona, thanks so much for coming in to speak with me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hardest hit among nonprofits are those championing the arts, as social service needs take precedence. Arizona Commission on the Arts Executive Director Robert Booker gave me details. Tell us what happened for the coming year's budget in the state of Arizona with the Commission on the Arts.
Well, the exciting thing this year for our budget was we were reauthorized, and every state agency goes through what they call a sunset every 10 years. And this year we were reauthorized for another 10 years of service to the citizens of Arizona, which is a great achievement, I believe, and we did that with friends on both sides of the legislature. We faced some tough times since the economic downturn. We've lost a significant portion of our state resources, including a $20 million endowment that was swept in its entirety by the legislature. And unfortunately, that endowment generated $1 million annually for grant funds. So where we were about a $5.7 million operation with a staff of 20, we're now a $2.2 million operation with a staff of 10. But the joke around the office is we're poor but hardworking.
And that $2.2 million, a good bit of that goes out to arts organizations and individuals in the state?
The primary amount of it goes out to organizations, goes out to school programs, and goes out to individual artists that we see as small business people, really nurturing small businesses around and throughout all of Arizona.
So besides the impact on the size of your operation here at your headquarters, what's the impact on the arts community of the reductions in funding?
Well, what we saw right after the economy tanked is we saw a lot of our arts organizations struggling with gifts that people had either promised or were intending to make. And those individual gifts really took a downturn immediately. We also saw corporate giving take a downturn because corporations were not making the resources that they had intended to make, so their gifts needed to be smaller. In addition, state funding was down. In addition, foundation funding was down because those foundations were not getting the return on their investments. So we had what some might call a perfect storm with our nonprofit arts industry. They were really hurting. And unfortunately, we lost some. I think that this is not over yet. I think we will still see some other arts organizations that are not really looking toward participating in what some might call the new normal, possibly go down and not survive these economic challenges. But the good news is many of them are surviving, and they're thriving because they have new and renewed commitments to serving Arizonans.
It seems like for a long time in Arizona and nationally and perhaps even internationally that public funding for the arts was a given. But that philosophy seems a little bit different, not only driven by difficult economic times, but driven by political philosophy. Where is that now in Arizona?
Well, arts organizations, it's important to note that arts organizations make up 50% of their budget through ticket sales and admission prices, and 50% of their budgets through contributions. And those contributions can come from individuals, from foundations, corporations, and from the government. The government provides about 3 to 7% of most nonprofit arts organization budgets. That's state, county, federal, city budgets. And those organizations use those dollars to provide access to residents, to citizens of Arizona, and folks that are visiting Arizona to participate in the arts. What we're seeing here at the Arts Commission is really going back to our roots, going back to our statute, going back to our mission that really demands that grantees of ours show us how their money is being used to service our citizens and our state. We're going to start asking at a higher level to organizations, what are you doing to be inclusive? What are you doing to bring families and friends in? What are you doing to bring all Arizonans into your art form to have an artistic experience? It's not enough to rest on your laurels. It's not enough to go after the low-hanging fruit, the typical audience that you've been having. We are challenging our arts organizations to go beyond that, to look out their window and look at Arizona and make sure that every one of those folks are invited into your organization and able to participate.
Now, do you see traditional arts organizations doing that, or are there some that are falling behind in doing that?
There are some that are falling behind, and there's some that are doing wonderful jobs. We just had a great collaboration by the Arizona Ballet and the Desert Botanical Gardens in producing an outdoor dance piece that was sold out most of its performances. We see great work happening down in Tucson at the Tucson Symphony in their expansion of programs and expansion of audience members. We see great work at the Tucson Museum of Art in just how they're curating exhibitions and how they're bringing really interesting, engaging shows on Frida Kahlo, on rock stars, finding new ways to connect with residents. Unfortunately, we still see some arts organizations that don't really understand how to invite people in, how to break down barriers of participation, and how to be inclusive in their connection to Arizonans.
What kind of support do you provide for the educational process for children to get them to start gaining an appreciation for the arts?
Well, this is one of my favorite areas, and I really believe that arts education in our schools is so important. We just did a survey and found that, unfortunately, 135,000 Arizona kids have no arts education, and that's theater, music, dance, visual arts education in their classroom at all. And that flies in the face of state policy and state standards. We need to make sure that our schools are offering what they're required to offer for our young people. Saying that, we know that kids involved in the arts do better in teamwork, they do better in their other classroom areas, they stay in school, they don't drop out. If a kid is involved in choir or is involved in band or is involved in a play, those kids are committed to their peers. Those kids are committed to staying in school and finishing their education. We know that the arts really help build a 21st century workforce.
To bring home what arts organizations face, here's Roberto Bedoya, Executive Director of the Tucson Pima Arts Council. Welcome to Arizona Week.
Thank you.
How are Southern Arizona arts organizations surviving in the wake of the Great Recession?
Sometimes I like to characterize it as a little bit of the good, the bad, and the ugly. In the sense that we're good, in the sense that people have sort of stabilized their operations. The ugly part is that there's been a significant sort of downsizing. People are doing less with more. Bad is like, I just want to be, we're not there yet. And we're not kind of growing out of this sucker punch we got with the recession.
Now, one of the bigger issues that we heard from Bob Booker a few minutes ago was that state government has drastically cut back on funding for the arts. What is local government doing in that regard?
We're not immune to that same kind of hit. For the Arts Council, since the recession began, I've lost over 40% of my public funds. With the county, it's a little bit less. And I guess for the public, they should understand I'm the Arts Council for the city and the county, and I do support the cultural infrastructure of our region with those funds. So it's been, with everything else, it's this sort of awkward ripple effect of like, how do you make the adjustments? The words I hear more often from my peers that run organizations is the language of resiliency and how to be dynamic. And for the organizations we support, which in a good year, 50, in a bad year, 38, like we did last year, it's a little bit easier for small and mid-sized organizations to take risk, to do some creative thinking around their operations. The larger organizations, there's unions, there's pensions, there's a big infrastructure that really demands a lot of attention. But losing the state funding and the hit of city funding has had a significant impact. On the good news side of our Tucson, I know this from recent research that I've studied, we really do good at the federal level. We do better than Phoenix in terms of what percentage of our organizations that apply to the National Endowment for the Arts. We have a pretty good success rate.
Now, what is the effect on individual artists, the dancers, the musicians, sculptors, painters? How are they feeling the effects of this?
Oh, again, hurt, However, for example, most recently, the Arts Council partnered with the Community Foundation here, and we supported a new initiative done as a byproduct of partnerships, and partnerships are really key to how we're moving through the receptions that actually supports artists, individual artists, and the development of new work. So as the community grows culturally, part of what you have to be mindful of is content. What's the aesthetic product that you're putting out on the stage, or you're putting into a book, or you're singing? Some of that is a byproduct of actually taking risks and doing new works. So it's growing.
Now, some would say that the best art is created in adverse circumstances. Are the adverse economic circumstances that we're seeing creating fresh art here in Tucson?
Yes, but let me answer this question. All art comes out of some kind of tension. Whether you have your tension is related to your discipline of, let's say you're a potter and you're working with this material, and that tension as you try to spin that wheel and make what you happen is an important part. Now, the economic tensions that we're living with, yes, most definitely. What we're experiencing is this great spirit of collaboration. For example, at the Arts Council, through partnerships with national foundations, we have an initiative called the Place Initiative, People, Land, Arts, Culture, and Engagement. And these support projects that are really about dealing with community issues. So a painter is working, a muralist is working with a church and a neighborhood association to talk about something that's really important in this neighborhood. Or you're working with a homeless shelter, or you're working with youth, or you're working with a scientist, or you're working with a conservationist. These kind of collaborative projects really have been a bright spot in the midst of all of this sort of downsizing. People say, okay, how do we work together now?
And in just about a half a minute that we have remaining, with such great social need in society, what's the justification for continuing to fund the arts?
You can't, the answer, the simple answer is you can't cut off your foot from your hand. You're part of a whole system. Vitality is essential to a healthy life and a healthy community. And arts and culture are an important part of it.
Roberto Bedoya, Executive Director of the Tucson-Pima Arts Council, thanks so much for being here to speak with me.
Well, thank you.
That's our program for Friday, June 1st, 2012. Longer versions of my interviews with Patrick McWhorter and Robert Booker are on our website, azweek.com. Next week, we'll drop in on the Arizona-Mexico Commission's semi-annual plenary session being held in Tucson. For Arizona Week, I'm Michael Chihak.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.